So our Bible reading this book is going to be, or this week rather, is going to be in the book of Revelation. Probably not the favorite read for a lot of people.
Well, these are some of the more familiar chapters because there's no vision yet.
That is the other side. Is that that if there are two chapters that are relatively easier to read, it is chapter 2 and 3. Though I think appropriately seen, Revelation 1, 2, and 3 are a unit.
Right.
And it might be helpful in your reading, since we only do a chapter a week, it might be helpful to read all of 1, 2, and 3. And as you read...
Well, this week and next week, since we're doing chapter 3 next week.
Thank you. I should have mentioned that, because we're going to read chapter 3 next week.
Right.
So 1, 2, and 3 together. And then when you're in chapter 1, pay attention to that opening vision. There actually is a vision here, though it's a brief one.
Right.
And it envisions, if you look at verse 13, Jesus standing in the middle of the lampstands, which are later identified down in verse 20 as the churches. And so the picture with which Revelation opens is Christ standing in the middle of his churches. And the implication, I think, there is that he knows everything going on with them.
Right.
And then that moves from implication to clear in chapters 2 and 3, because he starts talking about him, and it's clear that he knows everything going on with his churches. So maybe there's a pause point as we think about being zealous for good deed that's not unrelated to what we were saying about Acts 9 last week.
Right.
And that is that at the end of the day, the churches are his, and he judges whether the actions are right or wrong.
Right.
And that's going to become clear as we go through this. So maybe a good thing to remember as we think about being zealous for good deeds. And again, I think it's the same thing we were saying last week, that ultimately that is judged by Christ.
Right.
Because we are part of his church.
Right. And so earthly, human, religious rulers don't get to define what's good. Beware of the fads the majority is chasing, like we talked about last week. And I think in particular, one of the things that we learn here in these letters to the 7 churches, chapter 2 and 3, David, and like that 5 of the 7, get strongly criticized and warned that they may lose their lampstand before Christ. In other words, he may not recognize them as one of his congregations anymore.
Yeah, pause point.
Right.
One great thing to say there is that that's possible.
That's right.
You can have the name on the sign.
That's right.
You can be doing all the activities, or maybe it'd be better to say some of the activities, and still not be counted as his.
Well,
that's a danger. So it doesn't matter what works we do.
That's right. Like when he says, you have a name that you are alive, but I know you are dead. So again, back to human judgment of what is good. Oh, they're a sound congregation. They're doing good works or whatever. But Jesus says, you have a reputation on earth, a name on earth for being a good church. I see you as dead. And so again, we're back to that issue. But I think the other thing that really, because 5 of the 7, he's fairly critical of his people, even as he praises a few good things, is the general pattern I think you see in those letters is that worldliness crowds out good works. That our own living in the world and the world slowly adapting to the world, it seeps into the life of congregations and it strangles the good works that literally lead to the lampstand being a lighted lampstand, something that actually gives the light of God. Because we naturally absorb worldliness if we are not careful. Not just individually, but now collectively, the congregation itself becomes worldly.
Yeah, that is a pattern we see. In fact, there is a pattern that is followed in almost all of the letters.
That's right.
Jesus is identified and the church is identified, and then you have the good.
Right.
Almost all of them have something good said about them, and the bad, and almost all of them have something bad that is said about them.
And the fact that, again, he's warning them they may lose their lampstand reminds us that the general pattern is, even if there's still a mix of the good and the bad is on track to crowd out the good.
Right.
And because, again, that's the natural order of things unless we intentionally push back, fight back, and purify ourselves.
Now, you mentioned the problem of worldliness, and the interesting thing is that Jeff and I are actually both teaching Revelation in Bible class right now. So we're going
to different groups.
Yes. We're going to, but both groups of kids, by the way.
That's right.
So I'm going to see if we're together on this next one. You talked about worldliness being the problem, though I'm not sure that's true of Ephesus.
Yeah.
Ephesus seems to be the exception, and also a good case study for us, because what we're told about them is that they don't tolerate the evil that others had tolerated. They've exposed the false teachers for what they are, and yet, in spite of the fact that they'd taken, tell me if you think it's fair to me to describe it this way, all the right doctrinal positions.
Yeah.
He's still not pleased with them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're rule followers without relationship.
Yes,
is I think what happens. So in other words, even when you're doing the right things, when you start to do them for the wrong reasons,
you left your first love.
That's right. The lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns knows.
Well, and I wanted to bring that up because it seems like a really good opportunity to add a dimension to what we've been saying about good works. And it's not about creating a checklist and saying, well, I've done all these things. It's not just about the doing of the work, but the spirit with which it's done. And in this church, a church doing a lot of right things. And again, I don't know what your view is of this. I just kind of get the sense that the church had lost their passion.
Yeah.
They're going through all the right motions, but the passion and the love for the Lord isn't underneath all of that.
Yeah, and so even I think David, to steal a phrase from a reading we did a couple weeks ago in Romans 12, that renewal of the mind. It's not just a matter of following a checklist of rules. The mind in the Bible, the mind's kind of can be a very comprehensive term. I mean, obviously, it's how you think, but what you love, what you desire, what you want has got to be renewed as well. And so again, Jesus is not satisfied with people who merely can simply follow a different checklist. We swapped out Moses's for Jesus's or Islam's for Christianity's, whatever. He wants people who actually come to love and desire what he loves and desires. And there is a passion, there is a whole person involvement in this.
Well, we could preach a sermon on each of the 7 churches.
Yeah.
We'll let you ponder what some of those sermons would be as you read through chapter 2 this week. And then be sure and catch the podcast next week because we're going to talk about Revelation 3.